Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Kelli Hawkins is a Newcastle-based author who landed with an almighty splash onto the Australian literary scene when in September of 2020 she landed a rare 4-book deal with HarperCollins Australia for 2 adult books and 2 children's books. The first of her adult books, her debut, called Other People's Houses, hit the shelves across Australia on the 3rd of March, and I have to say, listeners, this is one heck of a debut. An emotionally gripping rollercoaster ride of a story packing a proverbial punch that will leave you stunned. So without further ado, I am hugely excited to introduce and welcome Kelli to the podcast today. Hi, Kelli.
Hi, Claudine. Thanks for having me on.
You're so very welcome. Congratulations on this fabulous novel. Wow. This was gritty, compelling, and completely surprising. Not what I expected at all. So I wanted to know, how are you feeling about its release and what is the feedback you've been getting?
Yeah, it's all been really, I guess it's been surreal to me. Yeah, it's been a long time coming because it was quite a while ago that I got the deal with HarperCollins. So it's feeling like it's here finally. But as an introvert, it's also quite overwhelming, I guess, being in the thick of the publicity, having a lot of social media posts to do and seeing everyone's responses to it on social media. It's been great. I mean, the response to the book's been better than I expected, to be honest. I think I'm not the most confident person with my writing. So to have a lot of the reviews coming in and the comments from people, you know, friends and family, but also book reviewers and bloggers and stuff have said they've enjoyed it. Yeah, it's been a thrill and also just slightly sort of weirding me out being as the center of attention when I usually like to just have a bit of a backseat. But yeah, it's great.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of the writers who listen to this podcast will be nodding their heads and understanding, you know, a lot of us identify as being introverts, really happy to be behind the computer screen, not so happy being out front.
No.
I totally understand where you're coming from. Now, this was such a Sydney story, I felt, and you really managed to capture the real estate zeitgeist that is so very much part of this city, but equally you were able to shine a light on what might go on behind the glossy facade, the imperfect, messy lives that are packed away when a house goes on the market. So I wanted to know, what inspired you to write this story?
I guess it was several things. The real estate was a big one. When I started writing it, which was quite a while ago, like 2016, I think it was, we were selling our house at the time. And I've always been one of those people who is a bit of a sticky beak and likes to see open houses. And so we were seeing a lot of those things. We were also selling our own house. And I guess I find it fascinating that I guess people are private and we have our own space. But then when we go to sell our house, we let just, you know, anyone come in, look around, look in all your cupboards, I guess, go through everything. And it's just a really interesting idea. And I think real estate is such a big part of Sydney. I mean, that's why I said it there. I have experience in that North Shore area of Sydney. I lived just on the north side, but I also worked up that way for quite a while. Obviously, I'm in Newcastle now, but it felt like a real Sydney book to me if it was going to be about real estate. And I wanted to have those really big houses, big blocks, you know, tennis courts and pools and all that sort of stuff. So it was, I guess, real estate was one of the main inspirations, I suppose, or the original idea, I guess, that came to me was just what if this woman who had some sort of issues went to open houses and took something from each one, just something small. So that was the first idea, I guess, originally. And I wrote that down and I just thought, I didn't really know where to go with it straight away, but I just thought it was an idea that could have a bit of stuff that I could work with. It was real estate, and then obviously there were other ideas and inspirations which came more from, I guess, character. I had read a few things recently, I guess, Girl on the Train type of books with that unreliable narrator, and in some ways I wanted that, and I wanted her to be relatable but also messy and a little bit older. I mean, she started off in the book being probably more of those things. She was messier and she's been toned down a little bit. And the third part of the equation was I had young children when I started writing it. So it was the idea of having something terrible happen to your children. And I guess as a mother, or a father, that's just the worst thing you can imagine. So was all those things coming together, I suppose, was where the idea came from.
Kate is the main protagonist in this story, and she was such a tragic character, so weighed down by her grief and her guilt, and the story is told entirely from her point of view.
Yes.
But before we go any further, perhaps for those who haven't read the story yet, can you tell me more about the story?
So Other People's Houses is a thriller, and it's set in Sydney on the North Shore, mostly around Wahroonga and that area. So it focuses on Kate, and when the novel begins, it's the date of the 10th anniversary of her son's death. So she's still grieving, she isn't coping, she drinks too much, she generally is a mess in her private life, in her work life. She's a borderline alcoholic, and she goes to open houses every week, and she likes to imagine the lives of the families who live there. And from each one, she takes something. So it might just be something small, something to remember the house by. So when she visits the Harding house at the beginning of the book, it's a beautiful house. It's pretty much her perfect house. And in that house, she sees a photo of a perfect family. There's a kind-looking man, a beautiful woman that Kate knew from her university days, and a boy that for just a moment she thinks is her own son. Of course he isn't, but Kate then becomes obsessed with the Hardings, and she starts to follow them, become interested in their lives. She uncovers secrets and lies for too long, probably, and then someone is murdered, and Kate desperately needs to find out who that is before the police arrest her for it. So it's a book about grief and secrets and guilt, but of course it's also about real estate.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, as I said, Kate was an incredibly tragic character, I felt. So I wanted to know, how did you get inside her head?
I don't know, really. I guess it's imagination. Like, I'm not sure. A couple of people have asked me. My husband died nearly 2 years ago. So a lot of people have sort of, I guess, have assumed that I have an understanding of grief because of that, which I do, I guess. But this book was written 2 years really before that. So it's pretty much how I imagined I would feel if something had happened like this had happened to my kids. So she's not me, hopefully. There's definitely parts of me in there. She takes things further, and she's obviously in a lot worse place in her head because what happened to her was so terrible. But I think it's just, trying to imagine what you would feel like in that situation. It's hard to put yourself there, and it wasn't really easy to write, I suppose. But to do that, you need to try and really think, how would you feel if it happened to you?
The action takes place in the present over the course of a month, but then we have flashbacks to the past before what Kate calls the incident or her son's death. We know that 10 years has passed, but you haven't given the timeline any more specifics than that. There's a modern story, there's Facebook and mobile phones, etc., but no specific year references. So was this deliberate?
It was originally. It did have years. It was just really an editing decision to take them out because it wasn't really necessary. This was all before COVID, so it didn't really have anything to do with that. But it was more just that it just didn't really need it. As long as it was the period of time that is current, it was about a month or 6 weeks that an auction would take or a selling process would take for a house. And then the flashbacks, were 10 years earlier. So, originally it did have dates, but we decided they weren't necessary.
Such an interesting way to approach it. As I said, obviously it's a modern story, and we know there are all the markers of it being a modern story. But it was just so interesting when I went back and looked at all the chapters. It's like, there are actually no dates on them.
Yeah, I have all the dates in my head. Like, I've got them. I did work them all out. But we didn't. It does work better, I think, without them there.
Yeah, I think so. So let's talk about domestic violence for a moment. This is such a huge and very sensitive topic, but what I like about fiction, especially stories like yours, is that it can shine a light on issues society needs to talk about more. And domestic violence in all its forms is something we need to talk about more, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, well, I guess it is what the book is about, but it was never entirely what the book is about. But it's certainly a part of it. There's not a lot of detail gone into that, and that was, I guess, a fairly conscious decision to leave it open-ended as why things happened to Kate and whether she should have or could have known or stopped them. It's something I guess the reader will decide. But it was just conscious on my part to not go into a lot of detail. So it is quite open as to what happened in the past with Kate.
I don't think Kate ever saw herself as a victim of domestic violence, did she?
No, she didn't. The things that happened to her, she felt came out of the blue. But there were some, signs that she wonders whether she should have spotted. What happened to her was, yes, from her point of view, wasn't something that she felt she had been abused over the years earlier, although obviously there would have been some level of control and not physical abuse so much. I think we only mentioned that it happened maybe once, but more emotional control that she definitely felt, but she never expected the things that happened would have happened. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think she really identified it as an abusive.
No, not really. And again, I did and ah about that. I mean, it's a story that you want it to be realistic and real, but knowing how far to go, whether it's necessary, is hard for a story like this. So, yeah, I sort of wanted to leave it more open-ended, I suppose.
I understood Kate's self-destructive behaviour and to some extent her self-loathing, but the obsession with open houses as a way of dealing with her grief was fascinating. How did this come about?
Well, I like the idea of it to start with, but I think it was the idea that she wanted something more, or she was exploring how her life might have been if things hadn't gone the way they had. So I think it started almost accidentally. And then after that, so very interested in other people's lives and how they lived them and whether, living through them a little bit. I guess there's that what if, or this could have been us, or she just wants to see how life could be, I suppose. And her life is so different from that. She's living alone. She's living in an apartment that she doesn't particularly like. She doesn't really have any friends, or she doesn't really do very well in her job. So I think it was more about just what could have been and what she's missed out on. So there's that, and whether she is able to get past that is part of the book.
Did you always want to be a writer?
I think on some level I have always wanted to be a writer. I was a journalist, so when I was young, I suppose writing was, for me, it wasn't something I ever really thought about because it wasn't a job that paid money. So it wasn't like I would never have thought to just say I'm going to be a novelist, because you don't just go and earn a wage for that. So I did do journalism, which I suppose is the next best thing, is really in some ways, and then moved on to various other careers over the years. Journalism probably wasn't for me, especially being an introvert. I mean, I like the writing part. I don't really like the going out and, and doing all the other stuff. And I was one of those kids, I think, like most writers, who I think I sent things off to Dolly magazine when I was like a teenager. I always did well in English. That was always my subject, or history, those sort of subjects. Then it wasn't until my kids were little and I had more time. I think that's a common thing with a lot of women as well. And I actually started writing children's books. I wasn't really keen on writing adult books at first until I had this idea. So I'd written a couple of YA sort of stuff that didn't get published, and then a kids book, and then I wrote this one. Yeah, it was mostly because I wanted to write books for my kids that I started, because I think I was reading some books to them that were pretty terrible at the time. There were just some books that they really liked that I just was so sick of reading, and they were terrible books. And I thought, surely I can do some better writing than this. So I did start off with that, but then really changed anyway. As soon as you start, I think things take on a bit of a life of their own. So the first things I wrote were actually young adult books, and my kids were only little tiny kids, so it wasn't really aimed at them anyway. I've always loved it, and I find that I'm liking it more and more. I find it difficult, but I really enjoy the process and the whole world building, just the whole nature of sitting down and thinking I can create something from nothing. It's quite amazing, really.
So, Kelli, tell me about your journey to publication. Obviously, you've just told me that you've written a couple of YA books and you started out writing children's books. So, with Other People's Houses, was this your first attempt at a novel, or were you a little bit further down the track with adult fiction?
No, this wasn't my first. I'd written 2 YA novels and a kids book, and there'd been a little bit of interest, but nothing major. So I tend to, I think that was always part of my problem, is I get a little bit bored with things. So I do not bored, but I'm interested in lots of things. So I'll write young adult and then think, I'd like to write a kids book. And then I'm like, I've got an adult idea. And then had another kids idea. So I tend to go all over the place, which probably isn't always good, because it might take you a bit longer to get better at it. I had the idea for it, like I said, back in 2016, and I applied for the Faber Academy Writing a Novel First Draft Scholarship, just on the back of a short story and the idea for this book, and I got that. So that was a 6-month scholarship. I was still in Newcastle at that time. So I travelled to Sydney every week at night time. I guess it gave me the impetus to write it. And then after that I finished the book. Probably it took me another 6 months maybe. And then I put it away, which they always say to do. And I did put it away for a while, just life, gets in the way, I guess. And then I had an idea for the kids' book that I've got coming out later this year. So I wrote that one. And then it was all a bit messy. I did other stuff. I worked on both of them a bit here and there. I didn't send other people's houses off to publishers for a while. I think I knew the idea was good, but the book wasn't really right. So I sent it into a few competition type things, and which was useful, got some feedback. That's probably about when my husband got sick, so life really got in the way then. Obviously, everything else just stopped. That was in 2018. In September, he was diagnosed with bowel cancer. So they gave him 2 months to live. So obviously that was just devastating for our family. And I didn't write at all for quite a while. He died in June of the following year, so 2019. And it was after that, the kids and I, they're teenagers now, and we were just traumatized, I suppose, because he was really unwell at that time. So before he died, he hadn't been in a lot of pain. So I said to the kids, I'm going to take 6 months off after he died, just for us all to, I guess, deal with it as best we could. But I did send this book off to agents on the back of some recommendations that I had, some writing things that I'd done, competitions and stuff. So I sent it to a few, and Melanie Oster was one who got back to me. She was the only one actually that got back to me, and she loved it. She helped me edit it again quite severely, cut I think 10,000 words from it, and then she sent it off to different people. So that was not long before I got the deal. But at the same time, it was a very strange situation, because at the same time I'd also sent out my kids' book to different publishers, and so there was interest coming back from different publishers from that as well. So it was like suddenly having all this interest when for years there'd been no interest, which was really bizarre. Turned out there was interest from a couple of different publishers, but HarperCollins had their kids publisher and their adult publisher take both my books to the same acquisitions meeting. And so they were interested in both books, as it turned out. And that's when after that, they offered me the 4-book deal. So those 2 books, and then another kids book and another adults book.
So along with Other People's Houses, as you've mentioned, you've got a children's book coming out later this year, and it's called The School for Talking Pets, a middle grade fiction book, which I suspect is a world away from the subject matter of this debut adult novel.
It really is, yeah.
Tell me about this book.
Yeah, so School for Talking Pets is, I guess, the main thing I'd liken it to is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So it's about a boy called Rusty who has a pet blue-tongued lizard. He's Australian, and when the book begins, there's he sees on the television these talking animals appear, and the whole world is just in awe because these animals are talking, which no one has ever seen before. Miss Einstein she's the principal of the School for Talking Pets, and she offers 5 children the chance to win a place at the school with their pets for a week. And so Rusty doesn't feel very confident. He's a very ordinary sort of boy, he feels, and he enters anyway after some encouragement, and he wins a place. And so he goes to the School for Talking Pets with 4 other kids, and then they have all sorts of adventures as people who try to shut the school down because they're worried. So it's a fun book. It's not serious, so it's completely different, and it was quite fun to write, actually.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Have your kids read Other People's Houses?
They're reading it now. They're not big readers, really, which is annoying. They were when they were little, but I don't know, things change. But yeah, they are reading it now, most I think because their friends are reading it. I didn't really have them read it before because it's quite adult, but it's not like, they're teenagers, so it's not too bad. And my son was the only person who'd read The School for Talking Pets, actually, in the first draft stage, because he loves animals. So I sort of wrote it, I guess, with him in mind, because I knew he just loved reading books like that about, I guess it's a wish fulfillment type novel where you've got, talking animals and they're all having a great time. So he read that one, but neither of them have read it since it's been, like, it's not I think it's at the stage where the cover's being done now. So it's all edited, and neither of them have read it, but they'll probably wait till it comes out, I'd say.
So, Kelli, are you still doing other work at the moment, or are you just focusing on your writing?
I'm mostly focusing on the writing, because it is quite time consuming, especially with having kids and on my own as well. So there's a lot to be done, but I write reports for a surveillance company as well. So I do that a little bit on the side, but it's not a big role.
As you know, and I mentioned earlier, there are many writers who listen to this podcast. So given your recent experiences, I wondered if you had any tips about the writing process or about seeking publication that you might like to share.
My general writing tip is the boring one of just writing. You need to write lots of words if you're going to get better, I think. My first 3 novels, I thought the first one would just get published. I thought, you just think, oh, that'll get published. And then you realize it's not good enough. So I think, writers are funny. I think on one hand, we think what we write is good. On the other hand, we think it's terrible. And you just need to write lots of words. You need to have them there so you can edit them as well. So even if you can't write every day, you need to write most days and think about your story maybe on the others, so you've got it in your head. Otherwise it just disappears, I find. So I guess that's the writing side. On the publishing side, don't lose hope. I guess it can take a long time. If you've got to be keen, you've got to really want it. And I think if you do really want it, it will happen. You've got to be prepared to accept criticism, accept advice. I mean, everything I've written has been edited so much, and all the editing and the advice people give me is generally improved everything I've written. So it's you need to accept all that, and you need to just I guess have hope that you will get there in the end. It can be a long journey. I hear about writers who have their first book published, and it's amazing to me that you can do that, because I think there's a lot of effort. You just have to learn the craft for quite a while before you're going to be good enough to do that. And if you do get lucky enough to get published, I think the other advice I would have is to just be professional. It's your job, I suppose. So you need to be professional. You need to be polite and do whatever you need to do, everything that goes around writing, not just the writing itself.
If listeners wanted to connect with you, Kelli, how could they do that?
The main place I'm on is probably Instagram, where I'm Kelli Hawkins Writer. So Kelly's just got an I, Kelli Hawkins Writer. And I have a website, which is just kellihawkins.com.au. I'm on Facebook, but probably Instagram's my main place.
Wonderful. Kelli, Other People's Houses was a compelling, emotionally gripping story that I devoured from cover to cover. A terrific debut, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Congratulations once again, and thank you so much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Thanks, Claudine. Thanks for having me on. It's been great.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.